Good afternoon and welcome to the Wednesday, October 29th, 2014 special meeting of the Planning Commission. Could I have roll call, please?
Planning Commissioners Astorian,
Here.
Landrigan, Lee, Yesayan, and Chairperson Manukian.
Here. May I have a report regarding the posting of the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, October 22nd on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
Thank you very much. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving to approval of minutes of our regular October 1st, 2014 meeting.
So moved.
Very good. Moving on to the oral communications, discussions which are limited to items not part of our agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. I have not received any pink slips relating to those, so we will be moving on. Very good. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Do we need to vote on the minutes? They were moved and seconded.
No.
No.
My understanding is that we don't vote. A second is all. It's a
If
consent
you
item.
insist, we could take a vote. I just want to make sure that you're in a better mood when we're doing this. Huh? Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to zoning appeals, we have none. In fact, today's one-item agenda day. New business, location 1407 West Glen Oaks Boulevard, relating to zone change case number PZC 1402628. Applicant American General Design. Do I have a staff report on the matter?
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. The case before you this evening is proposed zone change. The applicant is requesting that the city's zone map be changed on a particular site to allow the precise plan of development, the PPD overlay zone, to be placed on the site of a proposed project. The plans are behind you. The project site is approximately 56,500 square feet in area, and is located at 1407 West Glen Oaks Boulevard, and it also encompasses the parking lot behind it, which is city-owned, and it's a portion of a city-owned property. The applicant is requesting to change the zoning of the project site from C2 with a Height District 1 to C2 Height District 1 with a PPD overlay. Like all proposed zone changes, the request to place the PPD overlay on the subject site requires approval of the City Council with a recommendation from the Planning Commission. In the case of PPD overlay or PPD approval, there may be recommendations from other boards. In this case, we took the project to the Design Review Board last week for their advisory input. The resulting development, should the proposed project or should the council approve the proposed zone change, would be a mixed-use project. In its current configuration, it would contain 74 multifamily residential units, 12,500 square feet of commercial use, and a public open space area adjacent to West Glen Oaks Boulevard. The commercial space will be at grade and will front West Glen Oaks Boulevard in a C shape, and that's sort of delineated on the ground level plan in the pink. The public open space, which is approximately 5,400 square feet, is surrounded by the commercial uses on three sides, and then West Glen Oaks Boulevard to the west. So that's the white and green area, sort of surrounded by the pink area. This open space area will include benches and seating areas, a specimen tree, other landscaping, and some artwork. The multifamily residential units are located on the periphery of the site as well as above the commercial space. 66 of the units will be flats, meaning one level, and the remainder of the units will be townhouses, and those townhouses are proposed on the northern portion of the site. In the center of the site, there is a landscape courtyard for use by residents of the project. Access to the parking garage will be from a driveway located in the western portion of the site off of Glen Oaks Boulevard. There are 73 parking spaces, including 7 tandem spaces on the first level of the garage, while there are 148 spaces, including 23 tandem spaces located on the lower level. There have been adjustments to the parking numbers in the plans that you got. The count was inaccurate, and the staff report was inaccurate. These are the most updated. So 73 on the ground level and 148 on the lower level.
So that's how many total?
So that is 121 or 221, I think.
So it's not 199.
No, it's not.
It's 221.
It's 221. Yeah, and I think the plans that you got, 2 different numbers were cited. So the count at this point is 221 with a total of 30 tandem spaces.
And those are residential.
No, the one.
Those are, I'm sorry, the 221 are total parking spaces on the site, both required for commercial and for residential total.
The tandems.
The tandem spaces should only be for residential, and that will be made a recommendation. I think we made it a recommendation in our report, and the City Council will look at that. Should mention, as a result of the project, all existing development, including the existing building and surface parking lot on West Glen Oaks, as well as the city-owned parking lot behind that site, will be demolished as a result of the project. The PPD zone was recently amended, and the PPD zone was recently amended to be more consistent with the planned residential development, which allows some zoning flexibility. The PPD zone is tied to a specific development, so eventual approval of this overlay zone change would tie the zone change to this particular development, which is unique. The PPD zone also negates the need for individual variances. It allows some flexibility in zoning. With that, however, the proposal must further the general plan goals for the underlying zone, and 6 findings need to be made. As noted in the staff report, the applicants are requesting some flexibility in the standards for the project. Those include residential density, floor area ratio, lot coverage, setbacks, height, landscaping, private storage requirements, some parking standards, and some landscape buffering standards. Those are spelled out more clearly in the staff report. As I mentioned earlier, the Design Review Board, staff took this project to the Design Review Board last week, and the board reviewed the project as an advisory body. The board in general liked the project and had some recommendations to the city council. Eventually, the recommendation was to approve the project with some considerations. I'm going to pull Jay in here, and he'll go over some of those.
So, as Roger mentioned, the board had a vibrant discussion about many different issues on the site, and we've conducted an analysis that we have given you in the report that we just distributed before the meeting began. So I wanted to go over a few of those points since you didn't have a chance to really review this in any detail. What we've done is basically divide the board's comments into those that we support at staff level and we believe will recommend as part of our conditions in the staff report that goes to City Council. There are also a number of comments by the board that we felt were either adequately addressed by the project as proposed, vetted previously by the city in a manner that we felt was appropriate, or that we didn't think were germane for design review discussion and were more appropriately discussed or analyzed by other city departments. So we've divided this into 3 sections, the first of which is the 10, actually it's now 11 conditions. There's one that we forgot to include in this memo. 11 conditions that we'll be bringing to council with staff support. And I won't go over all of them in any detail, but I'll hit a few that I think are most important. The first, number 1, is that there was concern about the southern exposure of the public plaza that's at the street front of this proposal. And there was concern that there wouldn't be enough shade and that it wouldn't be a desirable place for public gathering and use. So there was a recommendation that there be additional shade structures added to the plaza that would accompany the large specimen tree that's also proposed in that area, and staff supports that recommendation. Number 2 is about bicycles, which we believe in 2 locations we recommend that there be enhanced ability to park and secure bicycles both for customers of the commercial units as well as for long-term residents. In number 3, the board had a discussion about the kind of the massing and the height of the project. They also used the word density several times. Density really isn't an issue that is appropriate for design review board discussion, but they certainly are within their it's within their purview to discuss massing and scale, and they were concerned about aspects of the height of the building in the sense that it was going to appear to be a 4-story building at most of its perimeter. As we've done our staff analysis on the project, we think when we look at the project from the south, where we see the 3-story hotel that's adjacent to the east, the commercial structure or the commercial complex at the corner adjacent to the west, we thought that the height and mass of the building, while obviously larger than anything in the immediate area, is appropriate and is in keeping with the width of the street, the size of the street, and other projects, other mixed-use projects that we're seeing in the city. We also had a discussion about the north of the site where the commission, or the board was concerned that there's a section of townhouse units that are 2 stories of residence on top of the podium, so really 3 stories in height, versus the end units, which are 4 stories in height, 3 residential on top of the podium. And the board asked to have those end units, reduced in height by a story. Our analysis of the proposal for the project to the north of the site, which is going to be a multifamily residential project proposed by the Housing Authority on the large lot that's now vacant, is likely to be just about as tall as what's being proposed here. So we thought in terms of its adjacency, the scale of the project is appropriate to what we expect to see on this Housing Authority site.
Okay, I'll hold on. Finish your report.
Number 4 addresses air conditioning screening that we already cover in our zoning code. A 5th consideration was for a solar study, also thinking about the southern exposure of the project and concern about heat gain in the units and the subsequent energy use by residents. So there was a consideration to add either canopies, brise soleil, some sort of solar shading in addition to what's proposed on the project that we think will adequate or hopefully bring down some of the heat gain and also enhance the design ultimately. On the west facade, condition 6 was to add some landscaping to just buffer one of the walls between the 2 projects. Number 7 was also a landscaping condition focusing on the northern buffer. Originally, we had hoped to be able to have tall landscaping to separate this project from what's built to the north, but because this is a GWP easement, we're limited in the height of the potential landscaping, but we still think it's a good comment and that we do want to find some way to buffer the interface between the buildings to the north and the project. One idea was possibly vines growing on the podium wall. There may be other options, and we can work with the design team to come up with appropriate solutions there. Again, thinking about the solar issues and the southern exposure, number 8, there was some concern about the glass panel, the glass railings proposed for the balconies. There was also, in a separate discussion, concern about these glass railings allowing any kind of clutter that's on the balconies to be visible from the street. A solution that we think might work for this is to provide some sort of obscured glass, fritted glass, frosted glass, some other solution besides the clear glass panels proposed that would complement the proposed design and solve this problem that the board felt was an issue. For number 9, there was strong concern about the concept of the size of the proposed specimen tree, which we do expect to be a large tree. And trees like that, according to the landscape designer on the board, need to have a 6 to 8 foot planter depth in order to succeed in a site like this. To do that would depress at least part of that planter area into the parking space below and could lead to the loss of parking spaces. We see that this is a very important consideration in order to maintain the specimen tree on the site, which we think is very important to the public use of the plaza and the interface with the street. In relation to the parking loss below, we thought this could be addressed through a parking reduction or a reduction in unit count, bedroom count, or other means that we'd like to work with the project team to see how we can make sure that we have adequate planter depth for this tree. Number 10, again, concerned about the public nature of the front plaza. There was a discussion of a condition to create a unique paving pattern on the sidewalk that would then extend into the paved area of the plaza. We realized when we thought about this that Public Works has very stringent rules in terms of how the public right-of-way is paved. So we thought a solution to that might be to extend the city-approved materials into the plaza so that we can have kind of a less of a boundary between the public sidewalk and the public plaza. Another way to address that might be through scoring patterns or other design means that we could work with the team on. Finally, a condition that is not discussed in your report, and I'm sorry that we forgot to put this in, but we think it's very important that there be some sort of physical barrier between the residential parking and the commercial parking. And it's not clear at this point on the project where one starts and where the other ends. So we think there should be some sort of gating or other barrier separating those areas. The next section of the memo contains 5 conditions that primarily focus on details that we generally ask for through DRB, just to make sure that we have all of the drawings that indicate landscaping, how the public spaces will be programmed, how materials will interface when they meet. And so those are pretty straightforward conditions that we plan to keep in our recommendation. And then finally, there were 11 items discussed by the board that staff felt were not either germane to the discussion, like I mentioned, or that we think were already addressed. And I'll only pull out a few of those, but I can answer questions about any of the others that you might have. If you look at item D, there was discussion about incorporating a drop-off area in front of the commercial areas, in front of the public plaza. And we're concerned about that because that would result in a loss of sidewalk area, and that is completely opposed to the city's goals of enhancing pedestrian experiences wherever we can. And we didn't see that there was enough benefit in any drop-off area to make that worth moving forward with. And I should note that all of these conditions are going to be forwarded to council. So council will see the full discussion DRB had, but they'll also see which we recommend moving forward with and which we don't think are appropriate. Item E was a concern about on-site traffic circulation inside the garage and dead-end aisle issues and the traffic on the one driveway serving both residential and the commercial uses. Our Public Works engineering staff had already reviewed this project prior to DRB and signed off on it, and they are the city's experts in this matter, so we think their analysis was adequate, and we think the proposal is okay as is. The same applies to condition F, which was the idea of moving the current driveway further to the east to avoid interfering with a bus stop in the intersection. Public Works reviewed that and also felt it was adequately located. Two more. On letter H on the last page, there was a consideration of lowering the east elevation to avoid the height of a wall that separates the project site from the property to the east. And we, at staff level, don't see that there's enough of a substantial change in the experience of users of the adjacent property to warrant kind of that extensive of a change to the project. And finally, letter I, there was concern that we recognize that the design is very similar to some of the things that we're seeing being built in the downtown specific plan area and other parts of the South Glendale area. While we recognize that, we also look at this design and we thought it was a very handsome, very thoughtful design. We think it's appropriate to the site. We think it's appropriate to the neighborhood as a design. And we didn't see a need to kind of reconsider aspects of it, which the board had talked about, including sloping roof areas or other features that might give it a little more what they called play. Hopefully the other items are all self-explanatory, but I can answer any questions if you have them. Hopefully.
I have. You mentioned a city authority, a housing authority owning property to the north of it. Which can somebody show me where, and what is it that you meant that the densities, I don't know how, and well, what are repeat what the plans are for that property.
You can see here on the screen, I'll just jump to their slides real quick. It's this, yeah, there's the, oh, I just destroyed your, it's this area here, and then there's also a stub going to the northeast, or I'm sorry, to the northwest of Sonora.
And what are the plans for that area?
Question. The plan. The Housing Authority had a series of discussions about 2 years ago about that site, the 5th and Sonora site. Some vision was at that point put forward. However, since then, the Housing Authority members have changed and the Housing Authority direction may have changed a little bit. So early in January or February, we're going to go back to the Housing Authority and have a discussion on what they envision for that site before we actually proceed to developing it. But we do know that it is going to be an affordable housing site that is going to be developed, hopefully to accommodate a lot of the affordable housing needs that we have in the future. So we do think that it will be built as an affordable housing project, probably maximizing the density to the extent possible, because this will probably be the last affordable housing project we're going to be able to do in many years.
So pretty much we can, as sure as you can be in Glendale nowadays, this would be an affordable housing project?
Yes.
Not an ice skating or...
No, the property is owned by the Housing Authority with housing funds and must be used for affordable housing.
Okay. And what was the discussion about the height?
The height was, there was discussion about lowering the height at the perimeter of the project to a 3-story height, which would be 2 residential floors above the podium, and then moving the higher portion of the building toward the center of the project. This would be a big change to the design and limit the number of units that could be proposed here. When we looked at it, we didn't see much benefit to either the street, where Glen Oaks is a very wide street, as you know, and can accommodate taller buildings than exist there today without the street being overwhelmed. We also felt the commercial sites to either side along Glen Oaks could support having a taller building next to them, the hotel use and the commercial use. And then when we considered the idea that this very likely new affordable housing project is going to be a very similar height to the project, we didn't feel that it was necessary to bring down the height at the rear.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the staff? Okay, I have a couple. In the planning in the memo relating to the DRB's findings and recommendations, and in your oral report, you stated that while density is not an issue properly considered by the DRB, who does properly consider density in any of these projects?
Yeah, it is part of the variation from the underlying zone. So it's part of the PPD zone proposal, and it is one of the things that you can consider. I think one of the points Jay was trying to make is that the strict design review sense, as well as just in a sense of how people generally use the word, they interchange density with building volume very frequently. And I think that's all a useful distinction to keep in mind, that you can even reduce the number of units and keep the same volume of the building. So it's good to point out that those are not the same concepts.
No, I understand. My concern was, I just wanted to, in this document, you're telling us that the DRB's jurisdiction does not extend into consideration of density. I just wanted to make sure I knew who does have jurisdiction over the question of
Mr. Chair,
or can consider it in its.
you can.
Okay.
The Planning Commission actually has it's within your purview to consider the density and make recommendations to the City Council.
Accordingly. Very good. Thank you very much. Now, I suppose I can talk about this later, so I will.
I have a question.
Good.
What's the precedence for converting some non-residential area to residential zoning? Where it's commercial C2 zoning?
Yes. Plan and the San Fernando Road corridor. Two big examples
Massive.
of this. Very large.
It's
It's been from non-residential to mixed use or residential to mixed use. Both cases have happened in those areas.
And it's already allowed in this zone.
What I meant is outside of an area that we've planned for, like for specific
it's
parcel.
already allowed in this zone, and outside of the DSP and San Fernando Road areas, I guess
So
I would point to
it is allowed in this?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's
I
already allowed.
thought it was C2.
It is, yes. Mixed-use projects are allowed in the C2 zone.
But it's originally C1. It's asking to move to C2, am I
No,
correct?
no, it's C2 now, and
It's
it's asking to have the precise plan of design overlay zone put upon it.
Yeah.
That's the requested zone change. If you're looking for a real-world example, there's a mixed-use project on East Colorado at about Adams or Chevy Chase.
Okay. All right then.
I believe I do have a comment and also a question for Mr. Agani. I believe is it because it's precise plan of design that we have that say or the discretionary view on as far as the density is concerned, or is it Planning Commission can?
Planning Commission has it's within the purview of the Planning Commission to discuss any kind of underlying zone change or changes to the existing zone that may constitute increase in density or decrease in density. That is always one of your primary functions to advise the City Council on that.
All right.
Thanks for clarification. So C21 is one story or two story?
C2 has, I believe, 3 different height districts.
But the one we're in right now,
The height district 1 is
that's what this is.
35 feet.
So probably 1 to 2 stories.
Oh, I would say 2 to
35.
3.
Okay,
I would say 3. Yeah.
all right.
All right. With that, let us have the applicant present its case, unless we have no more questions.
I just, if I could interject for 1 second, I did receive 4 or 5 emails throughout the day today.
For point of clarification, during the deliberations, I intend to comment
Okay,
on those.
great.
Because those individuals have not appeared, but they took the trouble to send an email, so the least we can do is just give voice to it, you know. So, yes, we'll take care of it. Thank you very much for reminding me. I have 2 pink slips from the applicant, one from a consultant and one from the architect. You get to choose who goes first.
I'll go first.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Rodney Kahn, who's the consultant project manager.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners, and City staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located on Brand Boulevard here in the city of Glendale. I'd like to start off my presentation just very briefly talking about the developer, who is American General Design, which is a firm that is owned and operated by Patrick Tarachian. And Patrick is a longtime Glendale resident. He has been in our community for quite some time. He prides himself on quality projects and quality design. He designs projects, he builds them, he owns them, and he operates them. He does all of those items. This project is exactly what he's doing here. Our site is located on West Glen Oaks Boulevard, and I've said this before. It's an area of the city that needs improvement, and it needs to be upgraded. We are proposing, as staff pointed out, a mixed-use project, a project that is home ownership, it's condominiums, it's commercial retail, and we have a significant common or community public open space component to it, which is very different and very unique for a private project. Our site itself, and you can see from the screen, currently is occupied by a vacant restaurant building and some surface-level parking lots. To the west of us is the El Pollo Loco Center on the corner of Glen Oaks and Sonora. The building that's facing, or the wall that's facing our site, is approximately 25 feet in height. It is a solid block wall. It also has some corner elements that pop up about 40 to 45 feet. To the east is a 3-story hotel. It is the Extended Stay America, and that is approximately 40 feet in height. To the north, and we've already spoken about that, is the affordable housing project that's being contemplated and discussed at this time. And obviously to the south, we have a very large thoroughfare, which is Glen Oaks. It's a 6-lane thoroughfare. It is separated by a landscape median for the traffic. What you may also see in this slide is directly north of us, in northern areas and even west of us, are some very large residential buildings. The zoning code currently would allow us to build a 160,000 square foot general office building by right. No floor area requirements, no lot coverage, no open space, none of it. We do not want to build that office building. Rather, we wanted to build what we feel will activate this area of the city. And that's to propose or start off with this 6,000 square foot community open space area. There is a number of different features which our architect will talk about in terms of this area, but it's being built and being maintained by private money. There is no city cost whatsoever. This community public open space is in the front of our project. To the rear of our project, we've actually stepped down the building. So it's lower in height and lower in stories, and that's to respect and to address the residential to the north of us. This is a mixed-use project, and it is a different type of project. We're used to seeing either all commercial or all residential, especially outside of the downtown areas or the San Fernando Road corridor. So that makes it an interesting, different, unique, and there is special considerations to it. We've reviewed staff's findings in the staff report. We agree with them. We have been handed by Mr. Platt, who highlighted his conditions or his suggestions in his report, and we have been able to review them as well quickly, and we agree to comply with them and include them as we're moving forward with our design. As a reference document, you have CEQA environmental analysis, which is a mitigated negative declaration. We have our traffic engineer here this evening as well to make a few brief remarks. But before that, I'd like to conclude my part of the presentation, invite our architect up, and have him walk you through the design of the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Speaking of the architect, Mr. Kip Dixon.
That would be me.
All right, then. Please, sir.
I'm going to advance us back and take you folks through a little bit of the building. And you don't have this rendering, but this is a more of an artist's conception in terms of being able to see the materiality and the reflections and things like that. And we'll come back to this as well, but it's important to notice that one of the significant things that we're really looking at in terms of this is the development of this public space in front of the building. And in good urban design principles in terms of the idea of people living upstairs, eyes on the community, in terms of engagement, in terms of that courtyard, and we're looking to have a restaurant, cafe that comes out onto the street, and then related retail uses that go around the perimeter of that courtyard. From an urban design standpoint, as I mentioned, this is something that we really like to do within our projects. We don't necessarily see that this site would be appropriate for all or large commercial, but we certainly do in terms of a place for people to go, as well as providing an amenity potentially for residents that would be coming or guests that would stay at the hotel. Talk about the site, and one of the things that's significant to note on the site that I think was somewhat overlooked in the design review board is that there is topography on the site. And at the front corner of the site adjacent to the hotel, if we call that 0, the site rises 4 feet to the west. It rises approximately 9 feet headed back to the north, and the far back corner is some 13 feet above where we start establishing our baseline in terms of measuring the height of the building. So while the building is 4 stories in some places, it is 3 stories at the back of the property, but a portion of that is now subterranean underneath of that. So I'll show you a section between that and the adjacent property. As Rodney mentioned, in terms of the existing zone, this is what a commercial use would be entitled to build on this property, having no open space requirements, no setbacks in terms of filling the site entirely. Not only do we not find that to be economically viable in terms of the site, but we don't think it's environmentally appropriate in terms of the site location. There was some question about what the massing envelope for the affordable housing project in the rear is. And when we follow the zoning steps for that particular property, and as was indicated that it would be looking to maximize the property, that becomes the volume that would be placed on that site behind us. And remember that that volume is also set 13 feet higher than the proposed site location.
Okay, so how is it that this is now granularized about the design, how many square feet that affordable housing is going to be on this presentation?
I'm sorry, are you asking staff?
Yes, I'm asking somebody that, because up until 10 minutes ago, we knew that that's going to be affordable housing, but we didn't know how big, how dense, or what have you.
I believe what the presenter is presenting is the envelope. That's the maximum that could be allowed under the zoning. That's not necessarily the project.
Right, there's no design there. That's just simply the maximum envelope. And you can see that, and the staff had commented in terms of the envelope that would be in front. that the two heights wind up being relatively compatible. Our approach was, rather than building that large mass, is to propose this mixed use. And what you can see within that is that where we have lowered this at the back portion of it, begun to articulate a public courtyard within this, and then carved back away at the front of the property in terms of trying to make this not only friendlier to the street, but also more appropriate in terms of what the relationship would be for that property behind. This is a cross-section that takes you through that, and you can see where our parking garage is, and that this is grade adjacent behind us, and this is the zoning setback in terms of what that potential property could be. And you can see that our property in this particular case is considerably lower than that property. As the property breaks down in terms of just looking at it, in terms of how we established program for this particular site, as Rodney explained, is that the housing is permitted on this site. The number of housing units that would be permitted on this site would be strictly looking at it in terms of being a residential project, and would be rather inappropriate in terms of having residential at the street level in this particular area along Glen Oaks. One of the things that we looked at is that we looked at what densities are currently existing in the city of Glendale and on the books in terms of by comparison. And then what we did is look to say that if a density overlay was put to this in terms of mixed use, look at what the rules would be for this particular property. And what you can see is that if we consider what the zoning is for the adjacent property, the standards, if they were applied to this site, would be a density of 87 units per acre. And in this particular case, we're proposing 62 units per acre. If that density from another portion, the mixed use, was applied to this, we would be talking about a 60-foot height, and we're talking about a 45-foot height in terms of how that comes into play. Both of these would be considered in terms of the 4 stories. However, a portion of ours is 3 stories, plus it being buried, so a portion at the rear of this property is approximately 2.5 stories relative to the property adjacent. We can hear
I thought there were studios as well.
What's that? We do. We have townhouses that are located within that block.
Those are the studios?
Those are the studios. They're 2-bedroom, but they are a double stack, and then I'll show you that there's actually landscaping that occurs on the roof of that. The FAR, if we calculated an FAR for this property, would be at 2.2. This compares in terms of downtown developments, many of them that have inclusionary housing as a part of it, of being well over 100 units per acre. So at 62, we felt that we could gain the amenities that we needed. And the other issue is that we look to build higher quality products. And one of the things that makes our group unique is that while Patrick is the owner of it and I'm an architect, we're partners in the sense that everything that happens within our office, and we really work to build quality products. It's not a situation where I hand over the design to somebody and somebody then goes away and builds it. We build it, all of our projects, collaboratively in terms of ownership of them as well. One of the things in terms of looking at that density is the density provides us with the resources necessary in terms of providing abundant landscaping, quality materials, as well as supporting a public space that goes within the building. That density also and the quality of the project, I think we believe, leads to having higher quality tenants that will be coming and attracted to this building, which I think would be an amenity not only in terms of these folks, in terms of having a restaurant to go to that's adjacent to this, but I suspect that with the number of units that we'll be providing here, this will be good business for the building that is on the corner adjacent to us as well. Oh, just one comment that I wanted to make there. The other thing is that unlike many of the projects which are downtown that are really heavily focused in terms of studios and focused in terms of 1-bedroom units, you can see that within this plan, that there's only 22 one-bedroom units, and there's 56, I can't even read it from here anymore, my eyes are going, 50 units, plus 2 3-bedroom units that are 2-bedroom. So we really look not to build very small facilities or unit. We look to build them large enough that they can be supportive in terms of family use. And there is a kind of dropped-in rendering where you begin to see the articulation of the building relative to the masses that are around it, and potentially that size of the development behind. Other thing to talk about in terms of our open space, which we find to be a very important amenity in terms of being able to not only make these livable, but make them very sellable units. Talking in terms of the open space at street level, inviting the public in and having the retail amenities in terms of supporting a vital kind of quality of life that would happen there. Landscaping that occurs in the middle of the courtyard that is shared amongst the units, and then we actually have townhomes in the back that we think are going to be very popular units that actually are 2-story units, but they walk up, and that there's actually a full landscape deck that happens on the top of that. One of the other things that we look at in terms of our landscaping is we're very interested in the use of both California natives and in terms of drought-tolerant plantings. And in terms of looking at what we propose in terms of the public space at the front, we've been looking at a number of different species and in terms of a signature or specimen tree. And we're certainly more than happy to investigate, as staff has recommended, in terms of finding a deeper well so that we can make that tree to be a very mature tree and kind of a signature element along the street. We've looked at liquid amber and we're looked at jacaranda trees. We're looking for something that will have a lot of color and it will be memorable, but also provide shade, particularly in the summertime. There have been some questions about shading in terms of that courtyard, and we're certainly amenable in terms of providing shade structures within that courtyard, so long as we're able to maintain signage for our tenants that will be in those spaces. Look at the palette in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the courtyard spaces, and then in terms of the natives that will be planted up on the roof. One of the other things that we tried to do is we tried to bring the landscaping along the back of this, so even though residents would be up on the top of that, they wouldn't be at the back of the building looking over into what the potential use might be that comes up next to us. A couple of views, we'll be looking at the use in terms of solar collectors, in terms of generation of electricity, as well as the heating of the pool, jacuzzi, and potentially even domestic hot water. This is a view from the rear where you can see the townhouse units and their landscape space, and then looking into the courtyard in terms of the residence courtyard. And there is a view in terms of looking at what we envision, looking at a combination in terms of some metal panels, wood facades. We would most certainly consider the sun control that the staff has recommended as being part of this. And there's really a minimal use in terms of plaster. We never use sand finished plaster. We always use very hard trowel smooth plaster with an elastomeric paint. So it's very durable, but it also gives a very high-end finish to it as opposed to a cheap. We're always looking in terms of having our window surfaces recessed back so there's depth and shadow character that happens at each one of these locations. I can leave it at that unless you'd like to get into the nuances of the individual plans.
Anyway, I have one question.
Sure.
What type of businesses do you anticipate would try to set up shop
in this
project?
particular location? I think that the first thing that we're looking for as we go back through this is that we'd be looking for a restaurant that would be something that would become a neighborhood location where there's outdoor dining that would be at the front of this, As we work our way back on around over to where the bus stop is, we'd be looking at something that might be in the area of donuts or pastry or services that would provide for those folks who are using public transportation. And one of the things that we often look at in terms of these is potentially even a bike shop that would encourage folks to purchase bikes, have bike service, things of that nature that would be within this.
Understood. Thank you.
Is it going to be restricted to any certain retail or commercial
Well, I certainly
uses?
don't think that we're looking at this in terms of a bowling alley or an arcade or a nightclub or anything of that nature. We're really looking at this in terms of uses that would support kind of a strong community use of the space, but also be very compatible in terms of the residences that are living immediately upstairs.
What kind of long-term bike parking?
We'll be providing long-term bike parking, and there's also discussion in terms of electrical charging stations for vehicles within the project.
And how many long-term bike parking?
Long-term bike parking is you tell us how many you really think we're looking at. We're probably looking at 50 to 60 bikes.
But those details haven't been.
No, we haven't necessarily purchased or spec'd out the individual bike racks. Looking at bike racks that will be out in front, but then also secure bike location that will be within the parking garage down at the grade level. And the residents, there's actually access in terms of a walkway that comes out. You can actually see, I won't zap you in the eyes, but you can actually see that we've got bike parking back here, and they'll have access to come out through the courtyard.
And where's
space.
the front short-term ones?
Front short-term ones, staff is going to have some recommendations in terms of what they see that, but I see that those are going to occur over in this area and potentially right there in that area.
What's the requirement for the bike parking with for the Cal Green standards?
You want to give us that one? 19? 19.
For long-term?
Long-term. Well, certainly, in particular, if we're looking at these being family units, children are often going to have bikes, and as was noted by staff, we don't want bike parking to be occurring up on the balconies, and we most certainly support their indication of using a frosted glass or something that will actually screen that. The other thing that we do in our projects is that we write into the CC&Rs that storage and barbecues and things like that are not appropriate and not permitted out on the balcony spaces. Other questions? No.
So then this is going to be a condo map on this project?
Yes.
Is that what the ultimate intention is?
Yes.
Okay, so it's going to be a tentative tracking. Now, let me ask you a question. You mentioned something about uses, and particularly in C2 zoning, and I'm going to read this out loud because everybody needs to be cognizant of this. I understand what your intentions are, and I don't know how we can nail this down, and this perhaps will go to the attorneys, but in a C2 zoning, for example, you can allow a domestic violence shelter. You can allow dish antennas. Schools of physical instruction. Stephanie and I and this body had a memorable conversation about private schools versus physical instruction and private specialized schools. So these are uses that are medical and dental laboratories. I'm not saying you're going to do this, and I know that you want to have perhaps a restaurant in there, but I want to have some sort of a massage service, by the way. You could do that in a C2.
Wouldn't be appropriate for our lifestyle and intent.
I know, but your zoning allows it.
Certainly.
And I want to have somehow pin it down and have some assurance as far as uses are concerned. And I know we've had this conversation before, and you've told me, no, it can't be done. So I don't know how we can address this. This is certainly a concern of mine.
You'd like assurances from Patrick, the owner?
Well, we'll get to him soon.
Certainly.
Let us get done with you first.
Not a problem. Go grill away.
So that's one other thing. I just wanted to, for my fellow commissioners to understand that this is a possibility. May not be a high possibility or probability, but it is possible in this zoning.
I was just going to say, considering the fact that we maintain ownership in the property, it's much more likely that we want to have very close control on these things. because it's our building.
Yeah, but we have experience with developments that
Turn it over.
No, not just that it was turnover, but it was supposed to be a restaurant space, and it's something completely different. Either because they didn't have the market for it, they weren't able to lease it, and so having that insurance, I mean, not just verbally, but
Understood.
on paper would be helpful.
Understood.
You could have a fire alarm sales shop in there too, by the way. C2 allows that. And you could also have a billiard establishment. C2 allows that.
If I may for a moment, although I appreciate what's going on, a conversation is not the proper dynamic for this. If you have questions, by all means, and I'm sure the applicant, the architect, and the project manager will answer it.
So
but please, let's have an answered question.
Sure.
Dynamic.
Let me continue with a couple of more questions. What is the plaza size on Glen Oaks, facing Glen Oaks?
It's a little over 6,000 square feet.
That is open to public?
Open to the public directly.
And the commercial size is 12,500, the space, commercial space that will be divided or not divided?
Right.
It's 12,500?
Right.
And they all have 4 per thousand, and it's an allocated number of parkings for the commercial?
Yes.
Thank you.
And one thing that I would make note of, there was some question about the tandems, and
I asked
the
that
way
question,
the way
yes.
the parking count has worked out for us is we're required to have 214 by use, including the size of the retail that we'll have, and we currently have 220. Is it ours? 220, including these tandems that are there, and so we're more than happy to remove those tandems or to actually designate them as employees in terms of the business that's there. We're overparked.
But the commercial is not going to have
No, there'd be no tandem parking for the commercial.
Okay.
And there was some discussion from the city and staff in terms of having gates to segregate the residential from the commercial. Absolutely, that'll be a portion of what we'd be doing from just a sales standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, just a point of clarification. According to our guidelines, the applicant is given a 15-minute presentation, and that would be in the aggregate, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Are we there yet?
Yes, they've exceeded the 15 minutes.
They have exceeded the 15 minutes. But again, just for the record, that means that the project applicant who just submitted the pink slip will not be able to speak.
Actually, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I would like for the applicant to state his views too on this thing. I wouldn't mind listening to the applicant.
Yeah, I think it's your discretion.
Yeah.
So.
Yes,
All right.
it is your discretion.
With that,
Mr. Chair?
Sam,
If I may, I just wanted to, because of the line of questioning, I just wanted to say that this is a PPD zone, and if the commission is inclined, you could propose to the City Council to restrict some of the uses. However, we ask you to please take into account the commercial viability in the long term of the commercial space. In other words, the underlying C2 zoning uses don't necessarily need to all be allowed here. You can restrict them. However, we do ask you to please take that into account, the commercial viability in the long term.
understood.
And that should not be too difficult for me, right?
Understood. Okay. Then, with that, I choose to exercise my, what was it? Discretion.
Right.
And invite Mr. Trochjan to the podium, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Trochjan, and I reside at 2800 East Chevy Chase. For the interest of time, I'll try to keep it short. I handed in the card because I heard you guys asking questions about the uses and the parking and the bicycles, etc. One thing I'd like to start out by saying is that we do a lot of these things. I've been doing these mixed-use projects in very dense urban areas for about 15 years. I'm on the HOA board of some of these buildings. I'm very intimately and closely involved with the management, maintenance, upkeep, the day-to-day living style of people that buy in our projects or happen to rent. I do share some of your concerns about some of the uses because it's my money, and I'm interested to make sure that we do a project that's successful. There are things that, as a landowner I can do, or as a landlord I can restrict certain uses or choose to exercise some way of discretion, but again, there are laws against discriminations and things like that that we need to be careful to address. But having said this, I think I have a pretty good idea of my end user. I know the product that we build through the meetings with the staff and through other meetings. I've heard comments about a downtown project. This is not a downtown project. The projects we do are very different in terms of quality and use than what I see downtown. I've been a Glendale resident for 30 years or so. It's sometimes hard to imagine that I've been here this long, but my interest is in the long-term holding of this project. It's a condo project. Even on our condo projects, I usually end up holding some of the condos, and we hold on the commercial sites. One other thing, on my personal life, I have never sold anything that I've owned. So going back to 30 years of being in the business, on the personal side of my business, I keep things long-term. And we're very interested in doing a project that is much higher quality than what I've seen in the city, and we think this is a great location for it. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer more details about uses.
I was going to say, saying that you haven't sold anything, that's not a very good thing for a realtor like me, so that didn't sound very good to me, but I'm just kidding.
Okay, good.
I do have a question.
Yes.
The open space, the 6,000 square feet of open space, appears to be shared with a commercial use. How much of that 6,000 square feet is going to be used by commercial? Because then I don't see it being public open space. That I see some of these sort of gray areas that concern me in the original presentation and then in the application and so if you could respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
Most of the 6,000 square feet will be public use. There's some area that would be dedicated to a potential restaurant use. And I say potential because I don't know if there would be a restaurant. There won't be I don't see this area bringing or requiring the need for a full-service restaurant. So there might be a pastry shop or something that's a smaller scale. And having looked at some of the businesses in the area, I think a certain portion of this, if you turn around and look at the back of the project, you see some, on the right-hand side, there's some sitting area, and I believe that was not in the 6,000 square feet. That is outside that 6,000 square feet. So that would be dedicated to, some sort of outside sitting, but I don't know what the use will be. But that's not part of the 6,000 square feet. And there will be a covenant recorded on the property so that open space will always stay as open space. It will never be gated, or it will never be assigned to some other use, private use.
Well, in Italy, there's a lot of open space that is shared by chairs, but it is also used by restaurants. And we do live in an outdoor, delightful climate. So if that is a successful restaurant, my concern is that the open space that's being presented, if it's shared with your commercial area and that's an agreement you have, and it's that you can have residents and others sit there, then it still meets the intent of the public realm. In essence, you're selling us this project on your gift to the public realm. And that gift, I want to make sure that the packaging and everything else about it, to me, really meets the definition of a gift to the public realm, and because that's what you're asking a lot of the other. It's a tit for tat. And so I want to make sure that when we look at those things, that we're looking at them in a matrix, and the matrices are pretty accurate, so I understand what we're giving to the citizens in exchange for what we're taking away from the citizens.
No, I completely understand, and I'm in agreement with you. I'll be happy to work with the staff.
Thank you.
But that's the intent.
Very good.
To what extent does your development include green building elements like low flush toilets, censored lightings, and low impact development?
Everything we do meets the green standard practices, and we try to do a little more than what's required. We do that completely in-house. Our staff is well aware of the newest developments in that field, and it is something that's important for all of us. I mean, it's just not.
So do you have like low flush toilets in this development?
Yes, there's that. There's solar paneling. There's a lot of things that we're looking at. LED lighting, material that is replenishable and so forth. But this is something that's very important for us in general. It's a direction that we pay a lot of attention to. We look at not just the requirements, but what else is happening.
I noticed there's a solar panel
Yes.
on the roof. How much of that electricity will it generate, or is that portion of it?
I don't have a detailed answer yet, but I'd be happy to get back to you.
Okay. That's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we move to Mr. Aram Kazazian.
Good evening. My name is Aram Kazazian. First of all, I want to say that I'm not against any projects. I'm just against the way some of the projects are considering the neighborhood and the way the projects are being together with the PPD zone. PPD zone, I'm very much concerned about. Also like to thank Jay and Roger. They did a great job presenting. Thank you. I will read you what statement I put in to you, gave it to you earlier today. The PPD overlay zone, both existing and modified by the ordinance number 5837 of September 30, 2004, is contrary to the charter because it provisions of the possibility of different regulations from the same class of buildings in the same zoning district. That's what about to happen if the zone change application is approved by council. Another PPD project in the C2 zone height district 1 is almost guaranteed to generate a different set of regulations than the current project. That's what the PPD zone overlay is all about. Regarding a zone change application, Article 15, Section 2, the Charter specifies that council shall act upon such a petition within 90 days of the filing thereof. Yes, this is a very short time, but given that they could have amended the charter at that time. Now, then we go back and to clarify this, this project was submitted in February of this year. It was not submitted now. According to the charter, it only gives them 90 days to bring it over here, and it has not been done. So it's a violation of the charter. Maybe the city attorney can give that information. She has my documents ahead of time. Okay, the northeasterly portion of this project is located on assessor parcel number 5623-005-907, which is owned by the city of Glendale, not by the applicant at this time. That section of the project is not a separate lot. Can a private party request a zone change application over the city of Glendale's own property? I need an interpretation from the city attorney again. Did the council authorize the zone change application? Has the city of Glendale committed to a lot line adjustment related to the subject property? Normally, project applications relate to a complete lot, not a portion of. Has the council, by 4/5 votes, already authorized the sale of the city property as required by Article 6, Section 15 of the Charter without any competitive bidding? Public notice is required for the exterior boundaries of the project. So was the public notice given to the properties within a 500-foot radius from the boundaries of the assessor parcel number 5623-005-907, or just from the project boundaries that owner occupies? Now, and even though they can't, give if they don't own the property, I don't know how they're going to give public notice. Ordinance number 5836, amending the PPD zone regulations, was adopted on September 30, 2014. It's only become effective 30 days later on October 30, 2014. Today is October 29th. It's not October 30 yet. Therefore, the Planning Commission has no authority to review this application against the PPD regulations today and give any recommendations at this time. The subject PPD design includes 12 deviations from the zoning code. The project proposes 74 dwelling units, where only 56 are permitted on this property. So they have a density bonus of 18 units, which is a 32% increase in density bonus, and it also has a 10-foot extra height, which in the front has more than that, by the way. The front of the property, due to the slope of the lot, has over 50 feet of extra height, not even 45. All you have to do is look at the long list of code deviations to see that this PPD proposal for a perfectly ordinary project is just giving away to the developer. No offense to this particular developer, but it's a problem. The site is not unique or special in any way. What do surrounding residents and businesses and public at large really get? I can't wait to see any future development. Now, remember, there's a 3-story extended stay next to, which is 28 feet in height, exactly, that building. And this particular building right there in the corner is going to be over 50 foot tall, not even 45 on that side. And it's on property line. And the existing building is only between 5 to 7 feet away. And so you're talking a 50-foot wall. Also, it sets back after 20 feet. It sets back a little bit, but the first 20 feet is right on property line, and those windows from the hotel face there. What is that project going to do? How are they going to look at a 20-foot blank wall? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay. After Mr. Kazazian's comments, I believe that the applicant is allowed a 5-minute rebuttal, should you choose to exercise that right. Did I do good? All right. With that, I'm closing the public.
I have some more questions for staff.
From whom?
Staff.
Oh, okay.
So what are the units permitted right now with the current use? Is it 50? It's 56. The current zoning. What are
While you're doing the math,
Sorry. It would be 56 units.
56. And then, so how many, where is it, like various deviations, or is it variances? I mean, what do you call it? I mean, it's part of a PPD, so is it all packaged up together?
So let me just answer this question, if I may, Mr. Chair. The purpose of the PPD zone is to look at a project holistically in the context of the site that it is on. It is not it's not a blanket multiple variance process. So we ask that, and that's the whole purpose. That's why we offer it as an option to the applicants, that when they come, we could say you could either go through a variance process, or you could apply for a particular zone, a PPD, that defines the project in its context and has its own sets of standards. So while I could understand that the comparison of the number of deviations will give you a sense of how it would differ from the C2 zone, that's not the purpose of the PPD zone. The PPD zone is to define one single project holistically by itself.
Speaking of this, can the representative from the city attorney's office clarify something? In Mr. Kazazian's prepared statement, he says that Ordinance number 5837, amending the PPD zone regulations, was adopted on September 30th, 2014. It only becomes effective 30 days later on October 30th, 2014. Therefore, the Planning Commission has no authority to review this application against the new PPD regulations today, October 29th.
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Planning Commission in this instance is a recommending body, it's not an approving body. The ordinance will become effective tomorrow. You're not deprived of jurisdiction to consider matters that are within your purview, and that is requested changes of zoning, policy decisions, study sessions, and this is, again, just for purposes of making recommendation, not an approving body in this instance, certainly within your jurisdiction to take a look at this and to share your recommendations with the City Council.
Okay. So,
Wait.
yeah.
Okay. Hold on, I'm not done yet. Going on, Mr. Kazazian's letter, written statement. There was a question raised regarding the back portion, city-owned property that is now sort of conjoined with the subject property. I understand that ownership was transferred from a private owner, from the city of Glendale to private ownership. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, no. The lot in question is owned actually not by the City of Glendale, but by the Glendale Housing Authority.
Okay.
So it's not subject to that particular charter provision that was referenced.
Okay.
It's subject to the Health and Safety Code provisions in terms of sale. Another aspect of that is the entire lot itself, which is the APN 5623-55907, which is the Housing Authority lot, and the issue of the notice. The Glendale Municipal Code Section 3040-020, which specifies how you're supposed to notify people in the manner, it's a little bit conflated the way it was represented to you. It's actually from the exterior boundary of the property that is the subject of the hearing. So property that is subject to the hearing is not that entire lot. So it is the 500-foot boundary that is used for notice is the appropriate boundary, because that is this piece of property, not that entire APN, that will be subject to this particular PPD application. The ultimate disposition of that property, actually the ultimate approval of the PPD request in front of the City Council, as well as the associated design, will be contingent and conditioned upon the finalization, the execution of a lot line adjustment, which must occur along with the closing of a purchase and sale for that portion of the Housing Authority owned property. So it'll all travel concurrently.
Okay. You had something to say?
Yeah. So, what sort of benefit is the city getting by increasing the use or the allowable units from 54 to 74? My experience has been that when we've allowed an increase like that, we usually get an affordable housing component or extra public space. What is sort of the concession happening here?
In this case, the most obvious one is the public plaza that's open to the public, and it's a considerable size plaza.
So how much more is that than the required amount that they have to have?
The required amount for the commercial, if this was to be used commercially, no required public space would be part of it. So they're providing a plaza that would otherwise, if this was an office building, clearly what was projected, what was shown in the slide presentation could have been built theoretically.
Because we don't have any required open space.
Correct.
For this area, for this
Not
zone?
for the commercial project. Correct.
Right. Any affordable housing?
No, they're not asking for SB 1818 concessions, so there's no affordable housing component to this.
So it could have been something.
If they had asked for it. Or if we had asked for it. We didn't. We didn't. Yes. We were more interested in the public plaza at this point.
Okay.
The chairperson Yassine, if I could add on to that, in terms of affordable housing, the sale will be at fair market value, and that proceeds of that sale will be restricted for the use of the development of affordable housing.
I'm sorry, so the proceeds of
the proceeds of the sale of that portion of the housing authority lot to the developer,
for the lot in the back.
Lot in the back can only is restricted to use for affordable housing projects. So that's a fair market value sale. So that will add to the housing authority coffers for future development of affordable housing, and it would be restricted for that purpose. The second component.
But that would happen
No.
So they're selling the owner is selling it?
No, the housing authority is selling it to the developer.
Okay.
And so the developer will
the proceeds of
that sale will go to affordable housing projects. And the second aspect is the open space component. The developer will be entering into a covenant restricting that use, that area to the use of public open space. That will be recorded against the property. It will protect that space from any incursions of other types of development that are not specifically allowed by the city. So to preserve it. So it'll be recorded against the property as a restriction and encumbrance.
And thank you, Ms. Van Meiden, for pointing that out. And that goes back to the question that Commissioner Astorian asked earlier. One of the reasons we are going back to the Housing Authority and the City Council for a new visioning for the Fifth and Sonora is that the proceeds of this sale, the Housing Authority will have the option of either putting that back into the project that will be built in the back, or decide to do otherwise with that proceed for future affordable housing.
And what has it already been sold?
The transaction will be completed if this particular action is completed by the City Council.
If I may just add one point, there is no requirement in the PPT zone that there be a public benefit to a project. It's as Mr. Hagani pointed out earlier, the focus of that overlay zone is really to promote developments which fit on its site. It's it's not really a quid pro quo thing that we give you a favor in return for you giving us a favor. It's more about just what is the appropriate zoning for that site.
Right, and if it goes beyond what is normally permitted, then the city usually asks for various things that would help reach its various other goals.
Again, the dynamic for this part of our process is an answer and question, not a conversation. So, with that in mind, let's ask questions and let's answer them.
So, and the applicant mentioned some of the green building elements that are incorporated. Is that required elements, or is that meeting Cal Green standards, or what exactly is it? I believe the applicant's saying that.
We haven't seen building plans yet, that level.
I can tell you that we don't know what the applicant is proposing beyond the building code. Glendale has adopted the Cal Green plus 5 additional layers of green building that are beyond the Cal Green. So at the time that they submit for plan check, we can find out if they're going above and beyond. But I can tell you that our requirements are pretty stringent.
And is it Cal Green standards? Does it have low flush toilet? Is that a requirement?
Yes.
That is a requirement.
Okay. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
My question is, it is with the PPD. The PPD is being requested, so it is not on the site right now. It's part of the recommendation. And so it does allow a deviation in a lot of ways. It allows a total reinterpretation of what the zoning code is. And that means that instead of the 56 units, it's asking for the 74. It would not be able to be requested except under this PPD. So I disagree with you, Mr. Foy, on that. I think that's kind of taking it in the wrong way. But I had some questions, and I think I don't know, shall I ask them now or shall I wait until we close the meeting?
Are these questions rhetorical? Because unless...
No, they're not rhetorical.
So you want answers?
Yes.
Okay, then go ahead and ask them.
From staff.
Okay, then let's keep
So I'm looking at all of the materials you sent me today, and especially, and I'm looking here on the City of Record Council decision that you sent to us on mass and scale. The second sentence in that is, while larger than most nearby sites, the project is in keeping with other mixed-use projects built or proposed along many of the city's commercial corridors. I'm concerned with that because we're looking at context. I don't really care about the other corridors, and I think that's really misleading, using it to compare it with downtown or to compare it with the San Fernando corridors. I think that it's very difficult for me to see this if I don't look at some of the elements that I think are part of the findings. And so I'm going to continue going on into the staff report. And you're more than welcome to answer that, because why do the other corridors have anything to do with the context right now? Is there a corridor plan for Glendale, for Glen Oaks? No. So I don't think that should be in there. I think that's misleading.
Sounds to me that is a rhetorical question, but I will have a stab at it. I think it's not implausible to consider the Glen Oaks with 3 lanes of traffic on either side comparable in some ways to other corridors in the city that may have the same level, the same width and same level of activity of, especially in this part of Glen Oaks where you have an eclectic set of uses and you have residential, you have commercial at various degrees. I don't think it's completely implausible to make that statement that staff has said. With all due respect, I stand up for my staff in this case. I think it is plausible. We cannot necessarily compare Glen Oaks with Glen Oaks because this is the first project of its size that has come across. But we've had mixed-use projects along Central. We have had mixed-use projects along Glendale Avenue and along Colorado. While they may not be exactly identical to this site, I think there are some comparisons that could be drawn.
Well, I think it's very different, too. There's a parkway in the middle of Glen Oaks, and there's not a parkway anywhere else, so I disagree with you. If we're looking here at the staff report, I'm glad that we discussed the city-owned portion. I had that brought up. It says here on precise plan of design, the PPD on the page 2, that the revisions allow flexibility in zoning regulations while maintaining compliance with the general plan, where development proposals take advantage of site characteristics, site location and access points, historic development patterns, land assembly, or simple economics of scale to achieve superior design or function in ways expressing the intent and providing the protections of the existing zoning designation. The concern I have here is I don't see how these findings substantiate this is an extraordinary site. What makes this site special? What makes it different? I totally agree that is the basis of one of the findings here, and I would like to know what makes this site special. It's a question. Topography exists all through.
Let them answer the question.
Sorry, sir. I'm carrying on this discussion. Okay, you can.
But again, you asked for this time to ask questions, and that's you're perfectly within your right. But you need to ask the question and allow time for an answer.
That's right.
Okay.
But this site is larger than most sites in the area. It is on a very wide street, as Jay has noted, which lends to it being able to kind of visually accommodate a larger scale building. It has large scale development near it, particularly the 3-story hotel next to it. And it does have the topography to it. And again, there are simple economies of scale which allow, in such a large site, to have a building which is taller or taller than what was normally allowed, while also accommodating things like a generous public open space in front.
Excuse me, if I may also add to the answer, Ms. Landrigan, your question's premise is that there needs to be a specific set of physical differences about the site that would then initiate the analysis for PPD. I propose to you that the premise of your question is inconsistent with the PPD proposal. The PPD proposal is an application for a specific procedure that is available to every applicant in the city to come and apply for. This applicant has paid the application fee and has asked to consider a PPD for this particular site, not because they think there is a special deviation such as that would be in a variance case, but because he chooses to propose this particular project for this site. And that is a zone change application, and it's not based on a certain set of circumstances that would necessitate that. It is something that the applicant has chosen, and we're processing that application accordingly.
Mr. Hagani, though, the findings indicate that there has to be something special about the site. Six findings need to be made, and that is why I'm asking that question. So my assumption is it has to be something special.
Which of the findings has a language here?
You have
I'm sorry, I do not see the word something special anywhere in the code.
It says, well, I see it in your findings here, in the staff report, that well, this is revised from the first one, so it says.
I think staff may have gone into elaborating the particulars of the site because they made some observations. That doesn't necessarily mean that the code requires them to prove that there's something special about the site.
It's actually the sort of context in which we pictured these sort of developments coming forward, but it's not actually a finding per se.
All right, so will you then delineate what the six findings are supposed to be, because we may not have that. We just have what you think the findings are, and we need to know what the findings.
They're on page 3 of the staff report?
I'm looking at page 3 of the staff report.
It says 6 findings need to be made in order for the PPD overlay zone to be placed on the site.
Right.
These are the findings. These are the ones that I had on phone.
Are there any other statements or comments? Well, okay.
While we're looking at that,
I will close the public hearing. You are entitled to ask questions to clarify.
Mr. Chairman, can you read the emails for the record, please?
For the record, they will be part of the record. They will not be read into the record. They will be part of the record, and I will refer to them during when I'm talking.
Thank you.
Okay, but they will not be read into the record. Okay, so now we are moving into the deliberation phase.
Let me just make a very brief comment. This is, I believe, the first precise plan of development for the city of Glendale, and it may create some consternation or some ambiguity because it's all new. But when we passed this plan, when we did it, I don't remember what the date was. The whole idea behind it was for a site to be able to be used for something that could be considered special, could be considered something that is beneficial to the city over and above what its zoning and everything else allows. And I think that's one of the reasons why at least for my sake, I'm asking the questions that I am. But it is precise plan of development. That's what it is.
Now, with that comment, do
I
you...
did find that portion.
Which says what?
About the specific site plan. It's on page 5.
Which says what? Go ahead. We're
The project proposal request some flexibility. On page 5, it says in the second sentence, actually, There are a number of ways in which the project plans vary from constraints of the zoning code, but are appropriate given the unique characteristics of the site, including its large size and topography, and of the development proposal, especially the large publicly accessible open space along Glen Oaks, which is why I asked the question, what makes the site special? Because I don't believe a large size and topography are extraordinary things about a site.
I could agree with you.
So that it's at the very top. So that's that was where my question came from. I was reading the staff report.
Understood. Any comments or from Commissioner?
Questions?
Yes.
Clarification?
Yes. Well, while everybody's thinking and reading, let me go over 4 emails and 1 letter that was put in front of me when I arrived today. I think it's fair that I at least comment on them. I mean, read the writer and the general tone for the record. One of them was from a gentleman by the name of Brian Ellis, who opposes this particular project. One of the reasons that Mr. Ellis brings up is the parking spaces, 199 parking spaces, the congestion, the morning commute, and the like. We have one from Mr. Bob Nixon, who again references the number of cars that will be parked in the project and the number of units involved in the project. Again, all of these will become part of the record. We have an email from Mr. Peter Fuad speaking to the parking issue, again referencing that it appears that all 199 residential and commercial parking spaces must be accessed and so on and so forth. Congestion and traffic issues seem to be one of the themes Mr. Fuad explores. Also, the viability of retail, the courtyard use, landscaping, city property, what was the original intent of the city property that would be acquired, and future development. We have one from what seems to be a Sophia P.
Right.
Again,
she didn't sign her email, but the address shows, I think, her first initial and last name.
Correct. But, yes. Again, referencing automobile usage and traffic and so on. And finally, we have Dr. Eileen V. Wallace and Ms. Alice E. Wallace. Again, referencing the commercial space, traffic, and so forth. Again, these will be part of the official record. But beyond that, what they do, as far as I'm concerned, one of the things that is glaring here is the fact that every single one of these authors was ignorant of the fact that soon there will be yet another massive project behind this project. Now, I don't have an agenda one way or another. I don't have an axe to grind. But it seems to me that if people did know that within a relatively short span of time, there will be yet another project behind this project, which will be a affordable housing, which will be at least as high as this project, right? 4 feet, 4 floors. I think we would have a greater, shall we say, concern and a more energized populace. But we don't have that. So I think that's some food for thought. I wonder if we, at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, when are we going to say enough development in terms of just housing and traffic and so on and so forth? Having said all of that,
I think I have an answer for that.
Oh, you do?
The moment we can afford buying the land that belongs to private owners and do as we wish with it, then we can say enough with it. We want to have a park in there, nothing else. But so long as these lands, and I've read this rhetoric in newspress, and it's all right, I'll go on record saying this. So long as these properties are in private ownership, what we can do is suggest and implement zoning. That determines what can't be built on. You cannot, you won't, the city will never do it. Take it, because it will be considered taking if we do totally away with its economic
value.
And
one of the reasons I like PPDs is the fact that it allows the city a tool to basically reduce the maximums, lower the ceiling.
Or the other way around.
No.
No?
No. I've been on this commission on and off for, how long has it been? 8 years? 6 years? Every time we have one of these projects, it looks huge until you realize what your maximum alternative would be, which is monumental. And then when you realize how big the maximum is and how small the actual is going to be, you go, hallelujah, let's go for this. We're deliberating, so I can say that. That's what I mean.
And this is, may I, Mr. Chair, and this is the kind of conversation I like, because this open dialogue, at least, really, it's educational for me. Let me just go on record in saying that this reminds me very much so as when the downtown specific plan was approved. I mean, it was something brand new, and there were people that didn't like it, and there were people that loved it, and what have you. Here's what happened with downtown specific plan. When it was implemented, it did away with what is known as unfeathered development. Right. Because prior to that, what you had was very simple. You can park it, build it, go to seventh heaven, basically. And this is why it's a good plan that it is where it is. And eventually you will do away with the construction traffic and so forth, and things will calm down. It's the same thing here. Something brand new to us. This is the first case that we're going through it. And I think we need to give it consideration. And you're absolutely correct. What's the alternative? It's either it's going to stay as a blight, fenced off, or somebody is going to come out and say, you know what? Class B office building, mind you, not Class A. Class B office building is a wonderful bet in the city of Glendale. And I can build 150,000 square feet in there. No qualms about it. I can park it. I can build it. Class B office building today has 2.5% to 3% vacancy rate. This is why it's a good bet. So when somebody comes out here and tells me, you know what, in a C2, I am willing to do a plaza. It's a nifty thing. I'm going to go a little bit higher on the height. And yes, I'm going to get some more units, but I'm going to be able to park it. And it's not going to be a 150 or 160,000 square feet building, and nobody else wants to buy it and turn it into a park. You know, I will give it due consideration. Yeah. That's my position. Yeah. So if I may I continue on, since I'm on the roll?
You're on a roll.
Let him go. Let him talk.
If I was to vote for this thing, I have some concerns that I'd like to be addressed. And I don't know how, other than deferring it to, the planning director. Number one is the use. I am very sensitive about the uses. You are at the entrance to a residential area, and yes, it's on Glen Oaks you can get all kinds of uses and so forth. But some of the C2 zoning uses would be totally inappropriate for this kind of a development. And so what I'd like is a covenant or a stipulation that the uses have to be approved at the very least by the planning director. That's very, very important to me. Second, if the use requires more than 4 per thousand parking, I don't know how you're going to address that. There has to be parking provided, period. In other words, not parking outside of the project, across the street, at Ace Hardware store, but at the project. If you can't, you're not going to be able to lease it. It's as simple as that. I agree with Stephanie that there has to be a covenant on the absolute delineated on the plans. It needs to show the open plaza space. That's a non-negotiable thing. I want all of the DRB recommendations as approved or as okayed by staff. Now, there was the north side planting of the trees, the conversation about that. And I'm going to leave that to the expert, to Stephanie, because I really don't know as much about that subject as she does. For now, these are my comments, with prejudice.
With prejudice?
Not finished.
Oh, without prejudice?
Without prejudice.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking at the planning staff analysis that addresses some of the DRB comments, and I see a lot of the code sections being requested for flexibility, and I see some of these already addressed. I think the landscaping is addressed. We talked about the tandem parking and the willingness of the applicant to restrict that to residential or commercial, one or the other, so that there's a fair element. The thing I do have a question that I wanted to talk about is that when I'm looking at the mitigated neg deck on page 7, on the second paragraph, it talks about the access to the residential units, and it says that because the commercial space has really elegant access, but I don't see the residential units having that same access based on that. Maybe I got that wrong, but it says access to the residential units on the second floor through fourth floors are via one elevator located in the main lobby and 4 stairwells, which are accessible from the internal access driveway. So it sounds to me like the residential access is really kind of hidden and kind of uncelebrated. That to me is kind of a concern. That's a concern I have. And that wasn't addressed by Design Review Board, but I have a concern about that. I also read a really interesting article that architects are the reason that we are obese, and because they hide stairwells, and they hide the stairwells, so you have no choice but to take the elevator because the stairwells are out of sight. Just want you to know that was a very interesting article. But I do think the entrance for the residential is really slighted. At least I couldn't tell where it is or how it is dealt with. And to me, I think that is of a concern. Since we are touting this as being, a big residential element. We've never talked about the private storage requirement. We talked about it not being on your deck. It says residential parking outside of subterranean or semi-subterranean garage, so I'm assuming that is on-street parking. Is that grade?
The first level is at grade.
Okay, all right. And my question about the north side is, if we're going to have that other building, if you plant trees there, you're going to have a hard time having them survive.
Actually, trees cannot be planted because of the utility lines. That's why we talked about maybe vines along the north side wall, or smaller plants.
Well, if you're going to talk about vines, what happens is if the walls are painted or if the walls are maintained, there has to be some sort of requirement that the vines be allowed to return after you do that, because that's the problem with vines.
The building gets painted, but the vines don't return.
Correct, because they're ripped out or stood on or something. So there needs to be a maintenance of whatever the intent of that landscaping is. So that's an issue that has to be.
We could look at a trellis that stands
On a
proud of the
hinge,
wall,
it
but is
comes away,
within,
yeah.
so.
So that, there are creative ways of doing it, but the intent of why you want the landscaping is more important than what landscaping is there. I think the DRB gave general guidelines, so you'll have to hire somebody to do your landscape plans, so I'm sure they'll advise you wisely. That I guess the lot coverage, the floor area ratio, the residential density, the neighborhood is very concerned about this. When I read Mr. Ellis's letter, I had noted some things, but I was a little more alarmed based upon his letter. And then I just came here and saw Mr. Fuad's. One of the things that is hard to see, and I picked out the only picture that shows it, is that it's really helpful to have adjacencies. Nothing is an island. It's not just your boundaries, it's how it fits in the city. And there's no elevations here that show me the context of how that residential hotel looks next to your property and how the Pollo Loco Tower looks. So you're telling me that it's within these confines, but it's a visual. We're going to see it for the rest of our lives. We're not going to read books on it. We're going to see it. And the closest thing I have to that, and I'm assuming you're digital, is this. And since I don't know if it's to scale and you're telling me, yeah, this is a scale drawing of the context, I think those are far more important pieces of information for us to look contextually, because that's what we're looking at, is weaving this in to the community of Glendale. And all of the lovely things that we've written here say that's what it's going to be done, but we don't have any drawings that show that. So that's the concern I have. I believe that we have the right as, United States citizens to develop our property within the confines of what the community believes is the context. And I don't see that context here. I think you should, I think if I looked at it all by itself in the middle of somewhere, I might say fine, but I don't see it in the middle of that street. That's my hesitancy and questions, and especially that site, it's a lot between two other lots.
But I wonder if, I understand what you're saying and I agree with it, but I wonder if the staff shouldn't give the applicants, for future reference, guidelines that, listen, just understand that the person looking at this needs to, if you're telling them that this is smaller or more beautiful or whatever compared to the building to the left and the right of it, make sure that you put your project in actual fact between the building to the left and the right of it.
Well, I know the DRB requirements have that, but to me, I really think it has to happen. It has to be a requirement that you do a street facade that shows context in every project, because, that's what's going to convince me.
Especially on these projects that we do have some say on the design, because it is called precise plan of design. So I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, I know there's a lot of comparisons done with the PPD and the downtown specific plan and the one we've done in San Fernando. The thing I find different here is that those went through a process that got community input, had advisory boards to establish those. This hasn't gone through that. It's for a specific property. So my concern is how this sets a precedent for future PPDs that are established. I don't think in this case it's really gone out of scale for the neighborhood. I think the staff has done, their diligence to make sure it fits in with the context. But it is new. I have never seen something like this before done, and if we had a different staff or way what we asked for the developer in terms of, getting these concessions, then, I am concerned how this sets a precedent for that. I would have liked to see an affordable housing component. I know this project going forward would allow for another project to happen. But I'm not exactly sure how of all those discussions took place, and I guess this is what came out of it. So I think with this project, it's not to the scale as some of the other projects that have gone on. I don't think we don't always have to, based on the zoning that is required or what we've passed before or allowed to pass, we could ask for less, and that still allows for a developer to build what they can. So I don't think this is an option between a park or a development that we're approving. But I think this project falls in line with the kind of context we're looking for in that location. And I think I don't know what the big caveat for me is for this area. I don't want to start going around and doing PPD zones for every single property. And if we're going forward with doing that, then I want to see a planning effort done for the whole area. So we're not doing this for everything. And we have an exact idea of how many units we want in this particular area, and what the maximum is, and if we go beyond that, then what are we asking? And those things aren't very clear to me. I know this was done for this specific lot, so I have mixed feelings about that, and I want that to be noted to council, and in the staff report as well.
Very good.
And
May I give back what I have heard from the commissioners, Mr. Chair? You haven't given your comments yet.
Well, I did actually. I think what we're doing right now is we're using a very good tool, planning tool, to our best advantage. We are, if we keep this practice up, although I do see Commissioner Yesayan's point, if we keep this practice up, we are going to have a number of developments in Glendale that are relatively creative, modern, obviously, green, hopefully, and in keeping with the vision that we have for the city of Glendale. So I'm excited about that. It's just because it's on the books doesn't mean that we can let go of the reins. We have to be mindful. We have to be diligent. And along the way, we are going to step on each other's toes. Eventually, you guys are going to go one bridge too far, right? And eventually, we're going to become too stringent. And somewhere along the line, we have to, we have to meet at the middle and make it work. And I'm sure we will. We've done it in the past, and we will do it in the future. You wanted to...
I would like to recap some of the points, not probably
means.
everything. Yes, I think...
Let me just finish, and then if I may, I just noticed something. What is this ground level parking without 5.5-foot masonry wall? What does that mean?
Basically, surface parking lots require a perimeter wall. This doesn't include that, but because of the special nature of the project, it's the ground level, and then the commercial, the residential units on the podium. That wall takes the place of the 5.5-foot wall.
Clear. Mr. Agani, we had a letter from a John Chang in our packets with
There's a redevelopment
number
one?
of assets from the Housing Authority. What was the purpose of wanting to edify us with this additional knowledge?
I'm actually looking at Roger because he gave the packet
Or
to
maybe
see.
it was only mine.
That might
See that, please?
that might have been purely a mistake.
I thought it was in your personal.
No, I don't
got
think it
it.
was. I don't
There
think
it
it was.
is,
I
right
don't.
here.
I don't think it was a mistake. I think this John Chang happens to be the controller of the state of
Oh, I
California.
know who he is.
Yeah, no. It's,
And this relates to the. Remember how the land in the back was for the redevelopment agency,
And then went
and
to
then how
housing.
the redevelopment agencies were liquefied, and they had to basically get rid of all their assets.
Sure.
I think this relates to the fact that part of that, the assets of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency, to wit the strip of land in the back of the main parcel.
But that's not in the list.
Not in the.
Actually, it says this draft is confidential, so let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it might be.
I'm willing to bet that it was accidentally picked up from the photocopy machine.
I think it
Yeah.
could be.
Okay. Well, I tried to spin it in your favor, but you did not let me.
Are the commissioners done? Can I recap what not everything that I heard, because I may have missed something, and if I do, I apologize. But I think what we heard was a provision to limit the uses such that they will not be inappropriate for the site. And Commissioner Astorian recommended maybe one way to do that is to have every use in the commercial space to be approved by the director or designated staff. And then one would be the other part would be that only commercial uses that for which there is sufficient parking on site be allowed, not any use that would require off-site parking, and that the DRB conditions and considerations that have been supported and presented by staff to be incorporated as part of the Planning Commission recommendations. And there was some discussion about the vines on the north side, and I believe Jay Platt understood. Between Jay Platt and Commissioner Landrigan, we managed to come up with some sort of an understanding of how to address that. And then there was this concern about PPD being a new tool that everybody uses. Let me just at least address that. The recommendation to use the PPD tool was by staff to the applicant. We don't always recommend it to every project. We only recommend it to the projects that we think are appropriate. In this case, it would either be because of the nature of the public plaza and the type of things that the applicant had in mind, we thought it would be much cleaner, much better to use the PPD tool so that we could look at the project in and of itself as a whole. We don't recommend that to every project. It's a very costly undertaking. It costs upwards of $30,000 to apply for this, and we don't necessarily advertise it and offer it to everyone. If a developer comes and wants to go that way and we don't think it's an appropriate tool for it, but you can be sure that staff will be telling them, and that staff will not recommend it in the future because we do not want it to become a habit. So if I missed any of the other concerns that the commissioners addressed, please let us know so we can make sure that it's
Yeah. Also, that if there's any area in the open plaza dedicated to a commercial use, it should be clearly delineated in the plans.
Yes, there should be a clear designation and a covenant addressing the public use of that space. Thank you.
For a couple of others that I caught in my notes that I'll just add, all of the DRB and staff conditions will be included in our recommendations to council. Commissioner Landrigan discussed the uncelebrated nature of the access to the building. We can express that to the designers and mention that as a comment to City Council. And then there was also, in the same way, we would discuss with the designers the possibility of them adding contextual information on the elevations or renderings before it goes to council. And then we'll certainly take that as a note in future projects like this to make sure we have that included in the package.
There was also, yes, maintenance of the landscaping. Oh, I'm sorry
For the
then.
north facing.
I have
Okay.
solution. Are you done, Roger?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. So we had a discussion about the planters at the plaza level and the type of trees that can be planted in it. Where did that discussion end at? Kind of.
I thought it was left to the applicants and staff to determine the best suited trees for those areas.
Yeah, the direction from DRB was clear that we would use any means possible to find other locations for parking if parking had to be sacrificed, so that we can make sure that certainly under the specimen tree at the plaza that we had adequate depth of at least 6 feet. And that was left to us to work out in the final design, if council approves that condition.
I believe that they're going to hire a licensed professional who will advise them well, and that's their right, and I think they'll find a person who will work with the city requirements and the requirements of the site, and I think that's why they're licensed by the state. So I leave it up to the applicant. I think it's appropriate to do that.
Okay. With that, can I have a motion?
Sure. Thank you. I make this motion that upon consideration of the proposed record of decision for design approval and the proposed ordinance relating to the placement of the precise plan of design overlay zone on the property of 1407 West Glen Oaks Boulevard, the Planning Commission hereby recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed design approval in the proposed overlay zone with the attached recommendations and comments.
Second.
May I have roll call, please?
Planning Commissioners Astorian?
Yes.
Landrigan?
Yes.
Yesayan?
Yes.
Chairperson Manukian?
Yes. With that, we move to agenda item number 8, Community Development Department updates. I didn't think we would have. Number 9, comments from commissioners. I didn't think so. With that, I adjourn this meeting.
So move.